Welcome to the Tropy webinar for graduate students. I'm Sean Tackett's, a principal investigator of the research project behind Tropy. Just letting you know that today this webinar will be recorded and available later on YouTube. So if you miss anything today, you'll have a chance to watch the recording later, and you can also share it with any of your colleagues who are unable to attend today. As I said, I'm a principal investigator on the project. I work in Luxembourg at the Center for Contemporary and Digital History there, where I'm head of the Digital History Unit. My ordinary partner in crime, the other principal investigator on the project, Abby Mullen, is not able to join us today, but that's okay. I will be in the excellent hands of Dr. Jessica Mack, who is outreach coordinator for the Tropy project and postdoctoral researcher at the Center for History and New Media. She is joining from the United States. And also in this webinar will be Sylvester Kyle, who is the lead developer on the Tropy project. He is joining from Austria, and I'm talking to you from Belgium. So during the webinar, while Jessica is leading the webinar and presenting to you, Sylvester and I will be answering your questions as they come in. So please go ahead and type any questions you have in the Q&A box in the Zoom. And Sylvester and I will answer them as quickly as we can during the talk. And we may be pointing you to the forums, and you can ask more questions and get them answered there. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean, for the introduction. And thank you to everybody for joining us. We're really delighted to be doing this first grad student specific webinar for Tropy. And we were very excited that there was a really high level of interest in this session. We actually had to close down registration because we surpassed our Zoom limit on the registration. So as Sean says, it will be recorded. So if there's anything you miss, or if you want to share the video with friends and colleagues, we'll be posting that video to YouTube. But I think the high level of interest in the session really speaks to the fact that so many of us are spending a lot of time on our computers during this time, going back through old archival research photos, unable to travel to the archives right now. And so instead focusing on reviewing materials and even searching through digital collections for new materials. So I think this is a really great time to learn to use Tropy. And we hope this will be a very timely and useful introduction. As Sean mentioned, Tropy is a project of the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media, and I think it's a prime example of the center's efforts to demystify the how of doing history. So what you might call the historian's craft, or the process that happens behind the scenes in the historical research process. So how do researchers take materials they collect in the archive, review them, organize them, and make meaning from them? How has that process changed in recent years with the digital turn? These are the kind of questions that I think spurred the founders of Tropy, and that we'll be diving into a bit today. So I'll say I've added a link in the chat to a page called the Graduate Student Resources. It's actually a post on the Tropy blog. And I'd recommend opening that up just because it provides some of the links to resources that I'll be discussing today as I mention them. And as we go through them, it might be helpful for you to have that open and just have all the links in one place. And a lot of that is also available through the Tropy website. So let's get started. As a graduate student in history or a related discipline, at some point you're going to be conducting archival research. That could be in an archive, or at the moment, more likely in a digital collection, somewhere in the digital landscape. So in the old days, people used to go to the archives for months at a time, pore over documents, take notes with those little golf pencils the archivist gives you. As we all know, this is not how research works today for most of us. Today, the technology has really shaped the way we're doing research. Instead of reading the documents in the archive, we often go to the archive, take photos of many, many documents, bring them home in our pockets, essentially, and then review them over a series of months and years. So it's really changed sort of the workflow and the process. There are at least two reasons for this change, I would say. One is the lack of funding or flexibility to be able to travel to the archives for weeks and months at a time. Most of us now don't have the time to read physically while we're in the archive anymore. And of course, many researchers have responsibilities and financial constraints and don't have the luxury of spending a lot of time away from home. The second reason is that the technology has improved. So photocopies, comprehensive notes, those are no longer really the most efficient ways to take sources home with us. Now we carry around high quality digital cameras in our pockets every day. And that's really one of the main reasons why we need a tool like Tropy. Most of the session today will be about that second piece, that technological piece. But before I get into that, I wanted to mention a few tips that Abby Mullen, the PI on Tropy, and I have kind of worked together to brainstorm, just to share about sort of suggestions for the archival research process itself. And to that, we'll add some ideas about conducting research in digital collections at this particular time, right, with the constraints we're facing right now. So first, I'd say it's really important to communicate with the archivist before you go to the archive. Archivists, of course, have incredible expert knowledge about the collections you want to consult, and they can very often point you to collections that you would not otherwise have found, that might not be fully indexed, might not be in the finding aid. This has happened to me very often in my own research on 20th century Mexico, where I speak to an archivist and find out about a trove of documents I would never have found otherwise. I would say that this is also a good idea right now in this time. Even if you can't physically visit an archive, it's a great idea to just try to get in touch with some of the archivists there. And there may be suggestions, there may be digitized material that you weren't aware of that they're able to point you towards. So I think that communication is really important. Along with that, reading the finding aid before you go. Many finding aids are online now, so it's important for you to get a sense of the shape of the collection, get familiarized with the logic of the organization of the archive you're using. So we encourage you to really do as much homework and research before you go to the archive as possible. And that still holds true, you know, in this time with digital collections. We really recommend, as often as possible, for researchers to come up with a plan of how you're going to work, both when you're taking photos in the archive and afterwards when you're processing those photos with Tropy. So the emphasis here is really on consistency, establishing a consistent workflow that you'll be able to follow reliably, and really that upfront investment of putting that work into establishing a consistent system is going to pay off for years to come. When you're thinking about this system, especially in the actual taking of the archival photographs, we always recommend that you photograph the box itself. So the box that those particular documents came in, the folder in many cases, whatever container it's in. Also, if there's any type of sort of request slip or any type of documentation right there in the archive that will give you a quick reference photo to say, very quickly, sort of, where did this come from? Which collection was it in? Which box, which folder? It's really important to just take that photo, and that will also help you organize your photos as you're looking through kind of a mind-numbing window full of thumbnails of photos that all often look the same. Those photos of those boxes or those folders will pop out, and that will help you kind of situate yourself within which folder you were actually photographing at that time. We always recommend photographing the whole folder if you have the opportunity to do so. It doesn't take a very long time, and it can be really useful to then have those documents later on in your own personal archive. So I think that's an important reminder for people. Often we think, well, I'm only interested in these 3 documents, for example, but 2 years later in your dissertation research process, you may wish that you had that information from that folder. So we recommend sort of just taking the time to go in and photograph the whole folder. Our opinion on photo quality is really that legible is good enough. So for most people, the camera on your smartphone will be plenty. There's no need to bring a digital SLR into the archive unless you have a specific reason to do so. So there may be exceptions to that, but overall, you're really fine with your phone. So how do we go about finding digitized sources right now when you can't travel to an archive? And I realize some of these tips that we're giving will not be particularly applicable for many people at this moment. In that resources page that I posted, we have linked to a couple of content aggregator sites, portals to digital collections, and in particular the Digital Public Library of America and the Europeana content aggregators. These are really good places to start. Obviously, this is going to be very subfield specific. So in Latin American history, for example, I know a group of librarians and archivists put together a really phenomenal database of all sorts of digital collections across time periods that people have been circulating during this time. And I think that's true of many subfields. So we'd really recommend consulting the librarians at your institution, looking into historical databases that your library subscribes to. Often there's a lot more online that we can access through our libraries that we're not even aware of. So looking into those resources, and you might be surprised what you find. I've actually also recommended to people to sort of tap into social media as a resource during this time. I've come across some really fascinating digital collections in my field on Twitter. So people are sharing things and sharing links to new digitized collections that are going online all the time, using the Twitter Storians hashtags or other hashtags in your own subfield. Okay. With all that said, once you have your archival research photos, what happens next? What do you do with those photos once you have them, and how do you organize them? For smaller projects, you may have been able to manage just by using your excellent memory or a few Post-it notes. But as you move into dissertation research, two things change about your sources. The first is going to be the volume of sources. And this is sometimes referred to by experts in the field as the problem of archival bulk, right? You'll have sources from a lot of different places. You'll have a lot of different sources from the same place in many cases. It will really become at some point impossible to keep track of what you've seen and what you've reviewed without some tools to help you with that. And obviously the availability of digital cameras has made this volume issue even more pressing. I'll just, as a little side note right here, also mention that we very much hope that you're also using Zotero for your secondary sources, another great free software that was developed at the center. So there's a link to that also in the resources. Yay, Zotero. Okay, so the other thing that changes once you get into the dissertation research stage is the amount of time between when you look at a source for the first time and when you write about it. Often that's going to become a much longer timeline than it was, say, for earlier projects you did in your coursework or master's or other moments in your career. You really can't rely on your memory for a long-term project like a dissertation or a book. You're not going to be able to rely on your memory to remember what you have or to remember where you put things, really. And so this is, again, why consistency of a system is really, really important. I think we've all been in a situation where we're staring down a sort of window of endless image files, and the idea of processing them, identifying them, or even let alone reading them can feel a bit daunting. So what you need is one unified system to describe your photos so that you know what they are, where they are, and that you're able to organize them in a flexible way, and a way that's flexible enough and adaptable enough that it will be able to change and evolve as your project inevitably develops and evolves. So that's another one of the big benefits of Tropy that we'll talk about, is the flexibility and adaptability of the interface. For the rest of this webinar, I'm going to be showing you what Tropy can do to help meet some of these challenges we've identified, and just familiarize you with its main features. So this is kind of an introduction to Tropy 101, just to really get a feel for how it works, what it looks like. Here's our plan. I'm going to first show you a fully developed Tropy project to just give you a sense of what that looks like. And then we're going to start over and try building one from scratch together, so you can sort of see how we got there. I think often starting with a blank slate can be intimidating, so it's helpful to see what that looks like filled in. But also we want to kind of walk you through the process of getting started, which is often the most challenging part. I'm going to share my screen now so you can take a look at this Tropy project. And I'd recommend, in order for you to see everything in the screen share, you may need to adjust your view in Zoom in order to see the entire interface. So to do that, go to the top and you should be able to click View Options and change the option to Fit to Window. So if you change the option there and View Options to Fit to Window, that should get you to where you need to be. Okay, so I'm now sharing this Tropy project, and hopefully everyone can see that. Just give me one moment here. I'm also going to make my mouse visible. Okay, hopefully that's working. Okay, a few facts about Tropy, just while everyone's getting their options all figured out to view the screen share. Tropy is free. Tropy is an open source software. Tropy is a desktop software. So Tropy does not live in the cloud. You do not need an internet connection to use Tropy. You download it onto your computer and you're good to go. So that's a really important thing to understand, that it's a desktop software, it's free and open source. We also do not track our users. We're not collecting user data or anything like that. So that's a really important part of sort of our mission and values as a project, but also as the center in general. Everything I'm going to talk about today is in the Tropy documentation, that's what you might think of as the Tropy user manual, and it's also linked in those resources. You can find the documentation at docs.tropy.org. So I'd highly, highly recommend you read over the documentation before you start working in Tropy, and when you hit a problem, go there first for help. It's really very detailed and kind of helps you build everything up from the start. The project we're looking at here is actually Abby Mullen's book manuscript Tropy project. So it's pretty well developed, as you can see, and I think gives us some great examples of some of the features and functionality that we want to highlight about Tropy. So I'm going to start by just giving you kind of a tour of the interface here. What we're looking at right now is the item table. The item table includes, by default, all items in your entire project. You can view it in a list form, like we are seeing right here, or you can view it in a grid form. And the grid, as you can see, you can zoom in further and further to see each of the photo thumbnails in more detail, depending on what your needs are at that particular moment. If we go to the left side of the screen, we'll see on the upper left lists. So lists are a way to organize your items according to your own project structure, or according to themes and topics that you select. You may create as many lists as you want. You can put items into as many lists as you want. And it's important to note that the lists are non-destructive. That means that if you delete a list, you're not deleting the items within that list. So I always find that very comforting, just in case I accidentally delete something. But here, I'll click here on Abby's list for chapter 1. So what she's done here is just dragged items that are relevant for chapter 1 into that list. And as you can see, I can sort of just drag and drop any of the items here. And she also has a thematic list here for conspiracies, just to show you an example of that. So we're going to talk more about all of these issues in a bit more detail later, but right now this is kind of the tour of the interface. Next, we go to tags below lists, also down here on the left-hand side. Tags are also non-destructive. You can create as many tags as you want. Items can be tagged as many times as you want and can have as many tags as you want. So it's a very flexible resource. And as you see, there are tags here for people's names, for topics, for themes, and really endless possibilities for how you can use tags. If we move over to the right side of the Tropy interface, we find the metadata pane. Okay, the metadata pane is where we shift from thinking about organization of materials to description of materials. And that's a really important distinction. Tropy is helping us to do both, and that's one of the advantages of using Tropy. So here we see the metadata for one particular item. And you can see here, I've selected this item in the item table. And so now I'm seeing the metadata for this item in the metadata pane. We're going to talk more about metadata in a few moments. Below the metadata pane is the photos pane. So that's actually where you're seeing the actual photos and some of the metadata and info about the actual photos that you imported into Tropy. And below that, we have the notes pane. So this is where you can take notes on particular photos, particular items, often used for transcription as well. So you may be asking, where do you actually take the notes? To show you, I'm going to double click on my item here in the item table to move us to the item view. So now we've moved from item table to item view. Now we're zoomed in on one particular item, and this is where you would actually do a lot of the work on an individual item. So just a little tour of this view so you get a sense of what's available here. At the top of the item view, we have the photo editing toolbar. This is sort of basic photo editing functionality. We can zoom in, zoom out, rotate, which I use quite often with my archival research photos because they tend to be rotated in all different directions. We also have some advanced photo editing capabilities, which can be very, very useful. So we click right here on the upper right. Here are some of the advanced photo editing tools in the advanced photo editing toolbar here. You can change the coloration, etc. We'll talk more about that. Down here is the notes field. This is where you can take notes on your photos, do transcription. I often will do translation here if there are sources in Spanish that I know I'll need to translate for publication. Sometimes I'll do translation in this field. So this is where your notes belong. Okay, now that you have a sense for the overall layout of the Tropy interface, we're going to create a new project together. And that will give you a sense of sort of how we build from a blank slate up to what we're seeing in this more advanced project. So I'm going to create a new project. When naming your project, we really encourage you to think expansively about a project title. So the best way to work is often to just sort of do it all within one project. For example, one project for your dissertation. So you don't have to be moving between projects too often. That seems to work best for most users. Obviously that's your choice, but Tropy is designed to sort of handle a very large research project or several very large research projects. So think expansively about titling your project. I'm going to call this one sample project just for today. Okay, now we have our blank slate. This is what you will see when you create your new Tropy project. The next step, of course, is going to be importing photos into Tropy. So I'm going to do that right now. There are several ways to do that, but what sorry, just one second. The method I'm going to use right now is by dragging and dropping. So I'm going to take some photos here from this folder I have on my desktop. You could also use a folder in Dropbox. And I'm just going to drag and drop those image files into Tropy. What types of files can Tropy import? Tropy can import nearly any type of image file and now even PDFs as well, which is very convenient. So keep in mind that Tropy reads these files as image files. If you have done OCR on a PDF, for example, Tropy cannot currently access the OCR layer. But these are really, Tropy is looking at these as image files, and that's important to note. Another thing that's important to note is that Tropy does not make copies of your photos. Instead, the software links to the existing photos wherever they exist on your hard drive. So nothing you do in Tropy will affect the original image files. Even if you were to delete them out of Tropy, or heaven forbid, destroy your entire Tropy installation, that will have no effect on your original photos. So I think we can all sigh a just breath of relief knowing that our original research photos are safe. And I know that gives me some comfort. Nothing you do in Tropy is going to change those original photos. Okay, so you can see here we are in the item table. We've brought our photos into Tropy. And we want to do some work immediately with them without even looking at the individual photos to ensure that we know where these materials came from. Why are we doing this? Well, aside from this being the right thing to do for citation purposes and organization purposes, it's really important for you to record the path by which you got to these materials, because this will help you get back to them should you need to. And it will also help you ask someone else to go back to them for you. For example, a research assistant or a colleague or someone else who might at some point need to find these materials in the archive. This will really give a very clear path back to them. So we encourage you to record this metadata as soon as possible. Ideally, it would be the same day you take the photos in the archive. And if you're downloading materials from a digital collection, record this information before you close the browser window. So really as early as possible, because once a few days go by, it's gonna start getting a little bit fuzzier for you where exactly each of these materials came from. So I'm going to go to our automatically generated list in the left-hand pane here called last import. This is a useful function to have. Of course, right now we're in a new project, so this is our only import of photos, but say you have thousands of photos in your project, it's really great to be able to just go straight to your last import. So you don't have to comb through a whole bunch of old photos to find the ones you're looking to work with right now. So here I'm seeing all the photos I just imported into Tropy. What we're going to do now is what we call a bulk edit of these items, okay? So one of the ways to do this, and fortunately when Abby put this together, she followed her own advice by taking a photo of the request slip that she had to fill out in the archive to access these materials. This could be, in your case, a folder or some other type of material, as I mentioned, that will kind of give you a very clear documentation of what this is actually within your photo stream. So here we have the request slip, and we're going to be able to use that. The next thing I'm going to do before I enter the metadata is to select a template. Okay, Tropy ships with two what we call standard templates, Tropy correspondence and Tropy generic. So what we're seeing right now is Tropy generic. For these particular photos, we're actually going to use Tropy correspondence because we know that they are letters. So I'm gonna scroll down to Tropy correspondence there and set that as a template. What is this template? Essentially what this is a form that's giving us certain fields to fill out, to fill in the metadata about these particular documents. Now, if you're not familiar with metadata, don't worry. You don't need to have a lot of expertise in that to use Tropy. This is, it's a complicated topic and people spend years studying it. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. For most of our users, using either Tropy generic as the template or Tropy correspondence works just fine. So those are the two major ones. However, for those who have more needs of using sort of a different type of template or want to be able to customize the template a bit more, Tropy does have the option to do that. And that can be very, very valuable for some users. So we'll go into that a little bit. But as I said, Tropy ships with just a few templates that will meet most of your needs. So I've selected the Tropy correspondence template here, right? We're going to select all these photos and fill in the metadata that we know applies to all of the photos. So this is a bulk edit of metadata. In this case, these photos are from the National Archives. So I'm gonna type that into the archive box here. The collection is Records Collections of the Office of Naval Records. Box is correspondence. Folder is letters sent to the Secretary of State. Now, where am I getting this? I already know this because I know these documents, but I'm originally getting it from Abby's very handy photograph here of the request slip. So you should be getting this information from the photos that you took for your own reference, okay? So the great thing about this is notice that now all of these photos, whichever one I select, they all now have this metadata because I selected all and did a bulk edit of the metadata. This is saving you an enormous amount of time. You're not filling in metadata for each individual item. You're able to do a lot of it in bulk. And so that's really, really helpful and will really help you down the line. We recommend that you include as much detail as possible. That will help you later on as well. So you'll notice I really did type out letters to the Secretary of State. Try to type out the full names and not use abbreviations or shorten things. Again, just because it'll help you remember things later on. My rule of thumb for archival research and for using Tropy is I try to set up systems that could be used by another person, by a third party. So I assume, even though I'm really setting it up for myself and I'm going to be the one writing the book, hopefully, I assume that I should set this up so that someone else could use it if they needed to. So I try not to use shorthand that a third party couldn't understand. And I found that that's helped me quite a bit along the way. Okay. I'd like to draw your attention here to the flag next to the rights field. There's this little yellow, little gray triangle here with the exclamation mark. All templates that come with Tropy flag the rights field, because we would like all users to fill that field out for every single item. It's very important for you as a researcher, and especially as a grad student early in your career, thinking about your project that may turn into a book or some articles someday. It's very important for you to know your rights to reuse, publish, and hold this material. Not only is it the ethical thing to do, but it's also going to save you a lot of headaches later on if you're working with a publisher. So we have a section in the documentation that you can read about rights and reuse of materials. You might want to check that out. And I think that's a very important issue that many of us don't think about until later in the process. And that can take quite a lot of time when you're getting to the publication phase. So in this particular case, I know that these documents are in the public domain. So I'm going to enter that here. The rights field is also a place where you could, for example, link to the website of an archive. Often they'll have a rights and policy and usage policy page that you could link to. It's a great idea if you're in the archives to take a photo of whatever form you signed about rights and usage, so that you have a record of that as well, of what you agreed to and what is and is not okay in terms of your usage of that material going forward. So we really recommend that you pay attention to that from day one, and it'll certainly help you down the line. Okay. Notice that this collection comes from the National Archives, where the organization of materials includes an identifier that's called record group. And you can see that here. It says RG45 on this request form that Epi used. Record group. So we could include that information in one of these fields that's already in the template, but it might also be nice to pull out the record group into its own field. So imagine if we had here a field that actually said record group, and then I could fill in 45 in this case. This is something that Tropy allows us to do through the customizable templates. So let's go do that to just give you a window into those customizable templates and what that's all about. One of Tropy's most powerful features, I would argue, is the customizable metadata templates. So if the information that you want about your items doesn't fit neatly into one of the standard templates, you can edit it and make it your own. And that's something that's really unique and can be very powerful. To do that, what I've just done is gone to the Tropy menu and then preferences, or wherever preferences are, depending on what operating system you're using. So we're in Tropy preferences here, and then we're going to go to templates. Okay, we're now on the template editor. So if I select one of the templates that's already existing here, for example, the Tropy correspondence template, which comes with all Tropy, any Tropy user will have this within their software already shipped with the software. I've selected that here. You'll notice that these fields are all grayed out, meaning I can't edit the Tropy correspondence template because, of course, that's a standard that we've created and that comes with the product. So if I want to customize and make this template my own, what I would start by doing is actually duplicate the Tropy correspondence template. I'm going to do that by clicking on this little icon here to duplicate or copy the Tropy correspondence template. And then I can change the name of it to whatever name works best for me. So in this case, I'm going to call it the National Archives correspondence template. Okay. Each template has its own unique name and URI. So when you copy a template, the URI changes automatically, and that all happens here. You'll see that here. But you do need to change the name. So as I did, you do need to assign a name to it. Name it something useful that's going to be helpful to you and that you'll remember. So I've called this National Archives correspondence because I'm only going to use this template for correspondence from the National Archives. What I would like to do to help this template kind of work better for me is first I'm going to click create. So it actually creates the new template. And then you'll see here, each of the fields that we saw in the metadata pane is here in an editable form. So we could actually edit the fields right here. We're not going to edit most of them because most of them are working very well for us. But in this particular case, what we're going to do is right below source, I'm going to click add, click the plus sign. And what I want to do here is create a field for record group, as we saw, that RG45. Okay, so just as an example, we're going to take DC description as a property. That may not be the best choice, but this is sort of just a sample to give you a sense of how we do this. So I'm going to label this record group. And I want to draw your attention also to these labels. So you'll see here, I mean, each of these is, most of these are using the Dublin Core metadata vocabulary. You may or may not be familiar with that, and that's fine. If you are interested in these topics, there's a lot more you can read about it, and there's a lot in the forums about it as well. But I won't go too deeply into that. I'll just say that you can select the property from these vocabularies here, and then you can give it your own label. So one example, I'm just going to scroll back up to the top here, is, for example, here we have a field for creator. The template calls this author, labels it as author. So every letter has an author and a recipient. So basically what we're doing is we're allowing you to customize this for whatever works best for you. So this is, I'm just kind of giving you an example of what that looks like. Okay, so here we have record group. And as you can see here, you can put in a hint for the record group, remind yourself what you actually want to put in this field. If you want to, you can make it mandatory by checking this box, just as we made the rights field mandatory. And you can put in a default value if that works for you. You don't have to do any of that. The other change I'm going to make here, and this, I'll show you an example of what a default value actually means. So if we go up to this field, which is labeled archive, we know that this is the National Archive correspondence template, right? So every document using this template will be from the National Archives. So I'm just going to write in here in the default value, National Archives. I'm going to make that read only. So that means it's locked. That's any document that I put in this template will have National Archives locked in there, and I will never have to type that again. So that's kind of the advantage of using these customizable templates. Okay, now that we got into the weeds of that, we're going to zoom back out. Templates, when you customize them, they auto save, so I don't have to click save or anything like that. I can just close this here, and then I can go back into my documents in the item table, select them, and I'll go into my templates here, and here it is, National Archives correspondence template. Okay, notice that in the archive field, I have my default value, National Archives, right? And suddenly I have this field here that I did not have before, record group. Okay, so I can put in record group 45. So this is just kind of a demo of how you can customize, how this could work for you, and how you could actually create different forms for all the different archives you're using, if that's something that's useful for you. Okay, moving along, we're going to actually focus now on one individual photo. And sort of follow it through the Tropy process to its happy, organized resting place. The item I want to look at is a letter from the Secretary of the Navy to the Secretary of State. I'm going to take this one right here. This is still, you can see in the title, it's still called IMG 8428, and that's going to change shortly. But that's the default title that is given. It's just whatever the title of the image file is. Okay. Actually, before I go into the item view, I want to show you still out in the item table. We can see here that this letter is actually 2 pages. This is one of my favorite features of Tropy. It really changed my dissertation research since I have so many multiple page documents that I'm working with in the archive. What Tropy allows us to do is to merge these 2 photos into one item. So I'm going to select the 2 photos, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select merge selected items. Okay, now what I have, and you can see here on the lower right, I have one item. This is one letter, one document, but it's made up of 2 photos. And this is extremely useful to kind of keep materials together that belong together. and make sure that the photos of a long document are all knit together in the right order and aren't going to be separated. And you can kind of review them and analyze them all as a group. So I've done that merge. And we're going to now go into the item view, actually into the item itself, which is made up of these two photos, and do a little bit of cleanup. So as we saw before, we have these photo editing tools. The first thing here that we'll probably want to do is rotate. And that can be extremely helpful in order to actually read these documents. Opening up the advanced tools here, the advanced tools was actually already open, but as you can see, I can adjust brightness, contrast, just helping to actually read the document, make it easier to understand. Right now we're fit to the entire window, but what I can click on here, or this actually fits the image to the window. So this actually fits it to the width of the pane. And this is, for me, the most comfortable way to read the source. So you see we're sort of zoomed in here. The sharpen can be very helpful, especially for these types of manuscripts. So I would just sort of experiment with this, play around with it. You may not need to edit, but it can be a helpful option to have. Invert colors can be very useful, especially if you're working with microfilm. If you've downloaded some images of microfilm that are inverted this way, this allows you to sort of invert back and forth. I wouldn't recommend it for manuscripts, but that's just one more option that you have. Okay. So as I said, I keep it generally at sort of page fit in order to work with the document, but you do have the option of zooming in quite far should you choose to. Okay, and then down here, as you read along, you can type your transcription or notes, questions into this box, okay? And you'll see that those will come up on the side here. You can also have multiple notes. So you might have one note here for transcription, another note for questions for follow-up, for example. So this, and those notes would all be listed here on the lower left-hand side, okay? Consistency is key, as I've said. So now that we know what the letter is about, we've read some of the letter, maybe we've done a transcription, we're going to actually add the item level metadata. Of course, you don't have to first transcribe it to add the metadata, but you can just read it and take a look at it and start adding the metadata in. So first, you're going to want to come up with some kind of title convention. This is completely up to you. I know in Abby's case with correspondence, she often uses the last name of author to last name of recipient. So we could say, for example, Mullen to Mac, if this was a letter from Abby to myself. And then fill in here, you know, the details of the author and recipient. Fill in the date, and obviously, or maybe not so obviously, we recommend using ISO format whenever possible. So this is not today's date, but here we go. What's today? The 9th. Okay, so this is ISO format. You have year, month, and then date. And again, consistency is key. So trying to use this from the beginning, you'll see that because I did it in ISO format, it automatically shows the date, you know, in sort of a more readable form. So that's going to be really useful if you start using that up front. And then just add in location and whatever level of detail is useful for your project is really what I would recommend, okay? Another sort of function that I'd like to highlight and just draw your attention to is the selection function. So I'm gonna just zoom out a little bit here. That's not what I wanna do. So what selection allows you to do is to pull a smaller piece of your item out to take notes on it or change the metadata on it, okay? So you can save your selection as something different. Again, this is not destructive to your photos. It's not going to change your original photo, but it allows you to sort of zoom in on one particular part. And that can be really useful. For example, I think this is really helpful with newspapers or with a document, for example, with small print where you really want to zero in on something specific. So right here, I'm just going to zero in on Philadelphia. And I took a little snapshot there of Philadelphia. That's a little selection. And then we'll see here on the lower left, a selection. That was my mistake selection. Ignore that one. Here we go, I can delete that. Okay, so my selection is here. This is Philadelphia. So say this was sort of a little excerpt you wanted to zero in on. It could be a signature. It could be just a little ad or whatever. If I use this selection tool, just quickly select that with a box, it's going to come up down here. And I think that can be really helpful as you're reading through things and you come back to it later. You say, oh yeah, I made this selection. I pulled out this particular piece. Let me go back to that. Okay. Another function to talk about is tags. We mentioned this a little bit earlier, but tags can be used very flexibly. So it's really going to be up to you and what works for you in your project. Some examples that we'll often give are themes. So thematic tags, you might have a theme about disease, for example, and history of medicine. You might have sort of a particular event, something that happened around the bicentennial. That could be a theme that you would tag different items with. For example, tags for people. So a tag for Abby Mullen, Jessica Mack, Sean Tackett's, any number of characters in your dissertation. I'm not sure what that dissertation would be about, but it would be interesting. So basically we can create tags here. And I'm going to the file menu here. This is one way to create tags. There are a few different ways that you can read about in the documentation, but I've gone to file, new, and tag. Now I have a new tag. And for example, maybe I want to tag about Philadelphia because I want anything that happened in Philadelphia or any letter that was written from Philadelphia, I want to be sure to note that. Okay, so now I have a Philadelphia tag, and what I can do is just drag any item that I want to be tagged with Philadelphia. I can drag it over and suddenly it's tagged with Philadelphia. You'll notice Tropy assigned Philly this blue colors. We have tag colors, and that can be helpful visually for you to get a sense of what you have. If you go back to the list view here, you'll see that the items that I tagged with Philadelphia have that blue circle, and that's very helpful visually to just get a sense of what's tagged with what. Another idea for tags, which I found very useful that I learned from Abby, was to think about logistical and housekeeping tags that are more about your process or your workflow. So for example, I have a tag that's called transcribed. When I finish transcribing a document, say I transcribed this particular letter, I'll tag it transcribed, and it's green and it's good to go. So that also allows me to track where I am in my process, what have I reviewed, what have I not reviewed. And you can create different tags. You know, you might have one about transcribed, you might have translated, you might have needs review, you know, any number of tags that would be helpful for you. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so we did new tags. I showed how to drag items to tags. Lists is something we touched on briefly, but I'll just go back into that once again. So again, I can go to File, New, and create a list here. You'll see this little tiny folder icon that comes up. So we very much recommend, one way to use lists is to just organize it around your chapter structure. As I mentioned, another way to use them is organizing them around theme. This is flexible and adaptable for you. One question I've gotten a lot is with my dissertation, maybe I don't know my chapter structure yet. So I'm hesitant to create lists around chapters because, you know, I don't know where everything's going to fit. That's absolutely fine. These can be changed later. You can always drag an item to chapter 1 and then realize in a month or in a year that it's actually going to go in chapter 2, and you can move it without much of a problem. But if you're not sure of your chapter structure, you don't have that nailed down, by all means, create lists around themes or around another organizing principle. So these are all supposed to be flexible. They're supposed to work for you. One question I have gotten, and I got this again this week, so I think it's important to bring up. I've heard a few users ask, should I create lists that replicate the structure of the archive? Our answer to that is absolutely no. Why? because the advantage of Tropy and sort of the entire, one of the points and one of the goals of Tropy was to actually free you up from that structure of the archive and liberate you from that structure in order for you to be able to create your own logic of organization around your own research questions and your own research project. So again, this left-hand pane is all about organization. This is about your organization based on your project. The metadata here that you're going to be keeping track of allows you to track all the important archival information. And obviously we think that's very, very important. The metadata is doing that for you. So there's no reason why you have to keep your photos in the order of the box, folder, or collection within Tropy. That's how they were organized most likely on your hard drive, but Tropy allows you to maintain that information, but now move things around so that they work for you in your project. So you may have, some documents from record group 45, some of them fit in chapter 1, some of them fit in chapter 5. You can move those around. You don't have to keep them next to each other. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind about what Tropy's offering for us. Okay. The next topic, as we're kind of winding down here, is how do I get stuff out of Tropy? This is a question that people often ask. Realistically, you probably don't need to get materials out of Tropy. You can back up your Tropy project file just like you would back up any other file. Either keep it in Dropbox, keep it backed up on an external drive, along with your photos, if that's what you'd like to do. You can also share your project with others and work with them collaboratively, although asynchronously, so not at the same time that they're working on the project, but we have come up with ways to work collaboratively, and there's a lot more detail on that in the documentation if you're interested in that. But that's using shared cloud folders, like something like Dropbox. And Sylvester knows a lot more about that. So there have been some discussions about that on the forums if you're interested to check those out. You can also install our Omeka plugin to export to Omeka, if that's something that you'd like to do. Think more about digital exhibits or digital display. So we do have the export to Omeka plugin. You can export to CSV file for if you'd like to have the information in a CSV file for whatever reason, whatever uses you have, you can use our CSV export plugin. You can also print out full copies of your items, either to an actual printer or to a PDF. And you can change what those printouts look like in the preferences section. So I found this very useful for teaching or sort of just showing a source to someone and showing them the metadata along with it and sort of annotating it as well. So there are a lot of other features that we didn't have time to talk about today, but we are of course always happy to answer questions about that. And the place to find out about them is really the documentation. So I've given you kind of a short taste today of the different functions, the different functionality and features of Tropy, what the interface looks like, and how to create a new project. But we very much recommend that you take the next step of reading through the documentation, which really lays out some of the nuts and bolts of how to work with these different features. So that's at docs.tropy.org, and that should be your first stop after this webinar before you get started. Abby says we should think about it as like a recipe if you're cooking. So read over the entire thing before you even crack the first egg, and that will save you a lot of trouble later on and let you know sort of what to expect from Tropy. If you have problems and if you have questions that are not answered in the documentation, please check our forums. That's forums.tropy.org. And that's also linked in that grad student resources blog post that I posted. You can search for a question there. If you can't find it, you can start a new question, but very often you'll find your question has already been covered by our team. And I promise that one of our team members will be able to help you out, often within a day and sometimes faster. So we really do have great response time on the forums. I know Sean and Sylvester have been answering questions as we've gone along through the session. Since this is such a large session, we may not have been able to answer all questions today, but we're happy to answer them in the forums, and we really encourage you to read through the docs because I think a lot of things will be resolved there. Finally, to conclude, we really hope that you'll stay in touch. You can sign up for our newsletter for info about new releases in Tropy. We're always updating it and improving the software. Events, webinars, other fun stuff like that. We'll be developing some more outreach events and training materials in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. You'll hear about that through the newsletter. And you can also follow us on Twitter at Tropy. So we love to hear from users. We love to see screenshots of your Tropy and just see how you're using the software and hear what your thoughts are. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this is a useful introduction to Tropy. And Sylvester and Sean, is there anything else that you'd like to add at this point?
I don't have anything to add. I think we were able to get through all the questions too.
Excellent.
I hope so too, yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We're really excited that you're interested in Tropy, and we look forward to hosting some more of these events in the future.